The house felt larger after the divorce, not because the rooms had changed, but because the silence had. Every sound echoed longer than it should have. The hum of the refrigerator, the ticking clock, my own footsteps reminding me that I was alone now. I told myself this was freedom. I told myself the quiet was peace. But most nights it felt like abandonment dressed up as independence. The divorce itself was not loud. There were no dramatic fights, no slammed doors. Just a slow realization that I had been married to someone who had already emotionally left. Years of feeling unseen, of conversations that ended before they began, of lying next to someone who felt like a stranger. When it finally ended, it felt less like a break and more like an acknowledgement of something that had already died. I was still adjusting when he moved back. My stepson hadn't been part of my daily life for years. College, then work, then his own life. When he called and said he needed a place to stay for a while, I didn't hesitate. Felt like the right thing to do. Practical. Safe. He was family, even if the marriage that connected us was gone. When he arrived, I barely recognized him. He wasn't the awkward teenager who used to avoid eye contact and mumble responses. He carried himself differently now, quieter, heavier somehow. His presence filled the doorway in a way that startled me, not because of his size, but because of the weight he seemed to carry. We hugged briefly, the kind of hug that lasts a second too long simply because neither person knows when to let go. At first, everything felt normal enough. Polite conversations. Shared dinners eaten mostly in silence. I reminded myself of boundaries without needing to articulate them. He took the spare room. I kept to my routines. This was temporary. But the house didn't feel empty anymore. It felt occupied in a way that made me aware of myself. I noticed when he was home. I noticed when he wasn't. I noticed small things I shouldn't have, the way his voice sounded deeper than I remembered, the way his eyes lingered when he spoke, as if he was actually listening. I hated myself for noticing. There was nothing inappropriate in our interactions, not on the surface. But there were moments that unsettled me. Late evenings when we talked longer than necessary. Shared laughter that surprised us both. A casual brush of hands in the kitchen that sent an unfamiliar jolt through me. Quickly dismissed as nerves or exhaustion, I told myself I was overthinking. Divorce does strange things to the mind. Loneliness makes you imagine meaning where there is none. He was vulnerable. I was vulnerable. That was all. Still, when I went to bed at night, I found myself replaying conversations I shouldn't have remembered so clearly, wondering why his presence made the house feel less hollow, and why that realization filled me with a quiet, creeping unease I couldn't yet name. Living together settled into a rhythm that felt natural far too quickly. Mornings overlapped in the kitchen, brief exchanges about coffee or errands that somehow lingered longer than they needed to. Evenings stretched into conversations that drifted without intention, as if neither of us wanted to be the first to retreat back into separate rooms. I told myself it was harmless. Two people sharing space. Nothing more. He started talking more. About college not turning out the way he expected. About jobs that never felt right. About his father. That was the part he hesitated over, choosing words carefully, as if worried about offending me. I assured him it was fine. That chapter of my life was closed. But the truth was, hearing his disappointment mirrored my own in ways I wasn't prepared for. He spoke about emotional distance. About feeling like he was always trying to earn approval that never came. I listened, nodding, understanding too well what it felt like to exist beside someone who never fully saw you. Without meaning to, I shared my own version of that story. Years of feeling invisible. Of shrinking myself to keep the peace. We weren't supposed to bond over him, yet that's exactly what we did. Somewhere in those conversations, the lines began to soften. I noticed I started waiting for him before eating dinner. Not consciously at first. Just a quiet preference that formed without permission. When he stayed out late, I felt restless. When he mentioned friends or women in passing, something tight and uncomfortable settled in my chest, followed immediately by shame. That reaction didn't belong to me. I knew it. I tried to smother it before it could take shape. I became more aware of myself around him. The way I dressed, the way I spoke. I caught my reflection once and didn't recognize the expression on my face. It wasn't longing exactly. It was awareness. And awareness felt dangerous. There were moments when the air shifted, nothing dramatic, just a pause that stretched a second too long. Our eyes would meet and linger before one of us looked away. When our conversations ended, I sometimes wished they hadn't. When they did, I carried them with me into the quiet of my room, replaying words, tones, silences that I justified everything carefully. He needed support. I was offering stability. We were both healing. That was the story I told myself when I realized I had stopped calling friends, stopped reaching outward. All my emotional energy seemed to funnel inward, toward the shared space we occupied. One night, while laughing at something trivial, I caught myself thinking how easy it felt. How understood. The thought startled me. Ease had been missing from my marriage for so long that I had forgotten how seductive it could be. I went quiet after that, withdrawing abruptly, claiming exhaustion. He looked confused, maybe hurt. Lying alone in the dark, guilt pressed heavy against my chest. Nothing had happened. Nothing had crossed a line. Yet I knew with an unsettling clarity that something already had. I was no longer just sharing a house with my stepson. I was sharing parts of myself that should have remained guarded. And that realization scared me more than any mistake I had yet to make. The shift came quietly, almost politely, as if whatever was growing between us wanted to give me one last chance to stop it. He grew distant for a few days, shorter in his replies, retreating into his room earlier than usual. I told myself it was relief I felt, that the space was necessary. But the truth surfaced in small, uncomfortable ways. I missed him. The absence felt louder than the silence had ever been before. When he finally spoke, it wasn't casual. His voice was tight, controlled in a way that suggested effort. He said we needed to talk. My chest tightened before he even finished the sentence. I already knew what this was about, though I pretended I didn't. He didn't accuse or confess right away. He talked around it, about confusion, about feeling out of control, about how living here had brought things up he didn't expect. I tried to interrupt, to redirect, to shut it down before it could take shape. But then he said it, carefully, almost apologetically, that he felt something he shouldn't. That he'd tried to ignore it. That pretending nothing was happening felt dishonest, that I reacted the way I was supposed to. I told him this couldn't happen. That it was wrong. That I was still his stepmother, even if the marriage was over. I said his father's name out loud, like a warning, like a barrier. My voice sounded steady, convincing even. But inside, everything was unraveling. After that conversation, we avoided each other. We passed like strangers in the hallway. Meals were skipped or eaten alone. The house felt tense, charged with words that had nowhere to go. I told myself this was the correction I needed. Distance would fix it. Time would dull it. Then came the night everything collapsed. It wasn't dramatic. No raised voices. Just exhaustion, grief, and a moment when both of us were too tired to keep pretending. A power outage plunged the house into darkness, forcing us into the same space. We spoke again, softer this time, stripped of defenses. He apologized. I did too, for reasons I couldn't fully explain. When he reached for me, it wasn't sudden. It was hesitant, as if asking permission. I should have stepped back. I should have said his name sharply, reminded him of everything at stake. Instead, I stood there, frozen between what was right and what felt unbearably human. The contact was brief, restrained, but it shattered something in me. A touch meant to comfort turned into something else the moment neither of us pulled away. The kiss that followed wasn't rushed or hungry. It was quiet, heavy with everything we weren't saying. The second it ended, reality rushed back in like cold air. I felt sick with myself. With the betrayal. With the relief. I stepped away first, my hands shaking, my thoughts spiraling. I told him this could never happen again. That it was a mistake. That we had crossed a line we couldn't uncross. He didn't argue. His face held the same regret I felt, layered with something deeper. Shame, maybe, or loss. The next morning, his room was empty. A note sat on the counter, apologizing again, saying he needed space, saying he would figure things out elsewhere. As the door closed behind him, the house returned to silence. But this time it wasn't empty. It was filled with the weight of what we had done, and the knowledge that some lines, once crossed, leave marks that never fully fade. Time did not heal the way people like to promise. It dulled the sharpest edges, but it didn't erase anything. After he left, the house felt different from before. Not empty, not quiet, but heavy. Every room seemed to remember. I tried to return to routines, to convince myself that what happened was a moment of weakness sealed away by distance. But distance didn't undo understanding. It only gave it room to echo. I replayed everything obsessively. Every look I should have ignored. Every conversation I should have cut short. I told myself the divorce had left me fragile, that loneliness had blurred my judgment. Those explanations helped me breathe, but they didn't absolve me. I had crossed a line knowing exactly where it was. No excuse could change that. His father called weeks later. Casual at first, asking if his son had settled somewhere new. I kept my answers vague, careful. My voice didn't shake, but my body felt like it might give way. Hearing that familiar name stirred anger I thought I'd resolved, then guilt for blaming him for something that was mine to carry. The truth stayed locked inside me, heavy and poisonous, because releasing it would destroy more than it would cleanse. I didn't hear from my stepson for a long time. When I did, it was a short message. He was doing fine. Working. Staying busy. He hoped I was well. There was no accusation in his words, no longing, just distance shaped into politeness. That hurt more than anger would have. It meant he was trying to move on. It meant I had to do the same. I forced myself to reconnect with people I had neglected. Friends noticed the change in me even if they didn't know its source. I was quieter, more guarded. I listened more than I spoke. Some nights I lay awake wondering whether healing meant forgetting or simply learning to live with the memory without letting it define me. I thought often about responsibility. About how infidelity isn't always loud or reckless. Sometimes it grows in silence, fed by unmet needs and shared pain. That didn't make it less damaging. If anything, it made it easier to justify, which was the most dangerous part of all. Months passed. The ache softened. I stopped expecting to hear footsteps that weren't there. I stopped imagining conversations that would never happen. But the experience changed how I saw myself. I was no longer able to claim moral distance from my own desires. I understood now how fragile boundaries could be when loneliness pressed hard enough against them. I never saw him again. And maybe that was for the best. What we shared wasn't meant to be revisited or redeemed. It existed as a lesson, not a love story. Something that showed me the parts of myself I had ignored for too long. And the cost of doing so. In the end, the divorce hadn't been the hardest thing to survive. It was facing the truth that even in freedom, even in pain, I was still responsible for the choices I made. Some mistakes don't explode your life. They settle into it quietly, reminding you who you are when no one else is watching, and who you must choose to become after.